Welcome to another episode of Military Transition Wellness. I'm your host, Michelle Seidling. Today, we are talking about cybersecurity, intelligence, and leadership, and how you can use that as you transition from military service. Here to help us do that, we have Christian Espinoza, a cybersecurity guru and an Air Force veteran, and author of the book, The Smartest Person in the Room, which we'll delve into later. Christian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you here as the guru and helping us to become the smartest person in the room, maybe.
Maybe.
And to get started, will you introduce yourself a little bit and what kind of brought you to this point and why, I guess, why this book? Why is it so important?
I'm Christian Espinoza. I grew up in California and moved to Arkansas when I was 12. So it's quite the culture shock moving from like LA basically to a small town. And I applied to all the military academies to sort of get out of my chaotic environment. I grew up very poor and on welfare. So my only way out of my situation was like the military, basically. So I applied to the military academies. I went to the Air Force Academy. And from there, I did communications for quite some time. And I spent about 6 years in the military, a couple different assignments. And I became a defense contractor after that. So my transition was not really straight into the commercial world. It was kind of a stepping stone where I was a defense contractor and still worked on the base with a lot of the same people I worked with when I was active duty. And then from there, I started working for some commercial companies. I've done some things for Department of Homeland Security, all cybersecurity related. I did freelance work for about 6 years where I did cybersecurity courses. I taught courses all over the world. I did consulting. I did ethical hacking or white hat hacking, also known as penetration testing. And then I kind of got bored with the freelance work. And I thought there's something more I should be contributing to society. And there's something more I needed to grow. So I thought the best way for me to do this was to start a business. So I started a business, hired people, and that entrepreneurship journey, going from solopreneur, freelance, to entrepreneur and growing a business with payroll and people and clients, that was a massive growth moment for me. Because a lot of the things that worked for me before did not work for me in my business. And that's when I decided to write the book. I had a lot of people in my industry and in my company. A lot of people always try to be smarter than everybody. That's how they get their significance. And that used to be me as well. And one of my engineers told me once that the client just didn't get it, meaning the client didn't understand what we were telling them about the results of a report we gave them. And the engineer just sort of like dismissed that as that's just the way it is. And I realized if my clients don't get it, then they're not going to be able to become more secure. And it's my job to make sure they get it. And that kind of like was a light bulb moment for me, because I used to kind of be the person that thought, well, so-and-so just doesn't understand. They're not smart enough. Whereas our role as cybersecurity people to make sure the clients and people we're dealing with understand.
Okay, wow, that is quite the journey, and I'm grateful that the military kind of helped you to really launch a good career. And being an Air Force veteran, now you mentioned communications and so forth. Now, what was it like for you? You mentioned you went to, you were a defense contractor afterwards, so it wasn't, straight into civilian life, I suppose. But what was that transition like for you?
It was challenging. I worked in communications and network engineering in the military, and I wanted to get into IT and cybersecurity. So what I did to maximize my marketability was, while I was active duty, I got a lot of cybersecurity certifications and IT certifications, like Microsoft certifications, and a few cybersecurity ones. And I felt like that would, on top of my military experience, helped me get my foot in the door. Because one of the challenges I realize is a lot of people have this challenge, a lot of veterans, is the military experience isn't always directly transferable to a civilian job. So when you get to interview, you have to articulate how your experience in leadership, working with people, handling stress, whatever skills are applicable to that job, how that translates to the civilian job. So I had that, but I also wanted the certifications. And one of the other things I did, which really helped, is I literally did every interview I could get. It didn't matter if I was like super interested in the job or not. Every single interview I went to. And I felt like that would give me practice. So I did probably 100 interviews basically when I was getting out of the military, mainly just to practice my skills and understand what that process is like.
Okay. And then ultimately, so I guess one of those jobs was as a defense contractor then, and that kind of transitioned you over there.
Yeah, one of those jobs was as an Air Force contractor at a building just basically across the street from where I was in active duty.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an easy transition because I still drove to base. I just took off my uniform and put on civilian clothes,
Sure.
and just went to a different building. And I ran into a lot of the people I worked with in active duty, and most of the people in that job when I was a contractor were also ex-Air Force. So we kind of had a team there to talk about transition. It wasn't just straight into a commercial job with only people that had no military background.
Okay. So do you feel like that kind of helped your transition a little bit from a relationship standpoint?
I feel it did. In the military, at least in my unit in the Air Force, there's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of teamwork, a lot of things we do together outside of work. And the unit I moved to when I was as a contractor, they had embraced the same philosophy because it was a military unit with contractors. So the contractors were included in a lot of the office functions, and there's automatically a built-in camaraderie, it seemed like, because we all had a mission and we're all working towards that mission. And when, in contrast to like a commercial job, sometimes it's a little bit fuzzier, like what the mission is, and the camaraderie is a little bit different. So I felt like that was a good transition for me because that cohesion and camaraderie were important to me.
Okay, absolutely. Then that kind of helped as you progressed through your experience as a defense contractor and then with your civilian career as well.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. What other aspects of wellness do you feel were very important to you as you transitioned out?
One thing was there's a lot. I would say having an open mind. In the military, things are there's a standard operating procedure for just about everything. In commercial companies, unless it's a massively huge company that has a lot of bureaucracy, it's typically not like that. And it's easy to sort of get frustrated because a lot of people are just sort of flying by the seat of their pants because there's no well-defined procedure like in the military. But at the same point in time, it's a moment to help influence that organization and add some structure and help shape that organization. So it's I think keeping an open mind and not expecting things to be at all similar as to how they were in the military is a big part of it. And like I said, I bridged that gap by going to a military organization as a contractor, so there was structure. If I had gone straight to a commercial company, it probably would have been a much more difficult transition because I did work for commercial companies that were purely commercial later on, and the mindset is like drastically different than a military organization's mindset.
Okay. So did you have to make adjustments in your own mindset as you transitioned?
I did have to make adjustments. One of the challenges I faced, and this is the irony of the situation, is I transitioned to a defense contractor, an Air Force contractor. And a lot of the military personnel, which I was just like, in context, I literally was a military person one day. The next day, on a Friday, I got out of the military. On Monday, showed up in a civilian uniform to a new unit. And people, like the military personnel, would look at you differently, like because you're a contractor and you're making more money than them. And there was like this weird, there's camaraderie there, but there's also this weird dynamic where you're almost like resented because you had it easier. You didn't have to do all the additional duties they did. You got paid more than they did. You didn't have the same deployment requirements they did. And that was a challenge for me to deal with. And it was a challenge that was, interesting because, like I said, I had just was in the uniform like not too long ago, and I was dealing with these challenges from people in uniform. So that part of the transition was a little bit difficult, but again, it just required having that open mind and realizing that, this is just the way people are, and I can choose how to respond to that. And if I respond in a specific way, in a negative way, or I get defensive about it, it's not going to make the situation any better. If I just kind of joke about it and say, well, I was in your shoes last week and I'm still getting used to this position, it kind of gives them a little bit of perspective as well.
Okay, to kind of help to build those relations to solidify it a little bit.
Yeah, showing some empathy for their perspective, and often if you show empathy for somebody else, they'll return the empathy back to you, versus digging your heels in and saying, "How dare you think this?" or kind of putting someone on the defensive. That's the last thing you want to do.
Absolutely. So that's fantastic. Now let's kind of dive into your book, The Smartest Person in the Room. Will you tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it? And I guess at what point in this whole career and different aspects of your journey, when did you write that book?
So my book is ultimately about what I feel is the reason we're losing the cybersecurity war, which has nothing to do with technology or frameworks or processes. It has to deal with the people in the industry, the actual cybersecurity people. And the book is, for me, it's kind of a moment of reflection, because when I wrote the book and I had these defining moments in my company, which I'll talk about in a second, I realized when I connected the dots backwards that I was one of the problem people I discussed in my book. So it's about my own growth as well. The defining moment for me that made me write the book, and I wrote this when I had my company, Alpine Security. I wrote it, published it last year. I wrote it the year before. The defining moment with my company did cybersecurity. I started the company to disrupt the status quo, to force myself to grow, to do something that contributed to the society, that created jobs and all that. And what I realized, this problem I continually had in my company, it was not related to a lack of technical skills in my staff. It was really related to a lack of emotional intelligence. And that stems from the fact that people in cybersecurity generally get their significance, because everybody wants to feel significant. They generally get their significance by being smarter than other people. And they constantly protect that identity of being smarter than other people. Their ego protects that identity at all moments, basically. So and you hear this in, like, people make fun of cybersecurity and IT people for kind of being lacking some emotional intelligence and always trying to outsmart someone. And that is really the root issue of why we're losing the cyber war. And for me, the moment was when one of my engineers, was my highly technical engineer, one of the best engineers I had, was debriefing me on how a review session went with a client. And he told me that the client just didn't get it. That was his words. And he said it like in a way that was like, he was like not happy with the client because the client wasn't smart enough to understand it. And I started thinking, I didn't start a company for my clients just not to get it. And this is a problem, like this specific time this happened, sort of like turned the light bulb for me and made me realize I used to be the person that talked over people's heads and said, complained they just didn't get it, and all these other things. So it made me realize that this is a problem in the entire industry. And it's because if you're trying to be smarter than everybody, if somebody understands what you're talking about, for instance, then it kind of like takes a chip off how smart you think you are. And this is really what made me decide to write the book. And it wasn't just that. I implemented a bunch of training in my company, emotional intelligence training, some assessments like a DISC assessment, some other assessments to really dial in and fix some of the communication challenges and dial in that emotional intelligence that was lacking. Because I feel like there's a lot of super highly technical, bright people in IT and cybersecurity and other career fields. But the thing they're lacking is emotional intelligence. And we've almost got to a point where we've like just accepted this. And we sort of created this monster. I like to call it the high IQ, low EQ monster, where we have a lot of people that just want to position themselves as being smarter than everybody else. So they talk over clients' heads. Clients don't understand it. They don't collaborate well. They don't ask questions for fear of feeling ridiculed. And all these cause a lot of underlying issues. So with my book, I came up with a 7-step methodology, which is the things that worked in my company to solve this challenge or to try to bring some emotional intelligence into highly technical team members.
Okay, so kind of building on when you were speaking earlier about building relationships and teamwork, you were kind of, does this book kind of infuse those skills into the reader and help them to utilize that?
Yeah, it does. My 7-step methodology, it talks about awareness is one thing, having awareness that, for instance, you have a specific model of the world. Other people may have a different model of the world, and that's okay. You can go through your life fighting somebody else's model, or you can work with it, right? That's an example, or self-awareness as well. Another step is like mindset, having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A lot of us like to think we're just not good with something, or we have these self-limiting beliefs, but our brain has this thing called neuroplasticity, where we can actually break an old habit and create a new habit, but we have to have the right mindset first to do that. And I talk about acknowledgement as step 3, that it's important to acknowledge yourself as well as other people. For me, as an executive in my company, as the owner and CEO, I used to have a huge problem acknowledging my staff. And I realized that I had a problem acknowledging myself. I could do like Ironman triathlons or climb mountains. I do some really hard things. And whenever I would finish like an Ironman triathlon, I'd just automatically be thinking on to the next thing and never take a moment to acknowledge all I did to prepare for that and accomplish it. And when I realized that and was able to acknowledge myself, then I could acknowledge my staff, which helps as well. And step 4 is communication. I'm a believer that the meaning of communication is the response you get. So if you're not getting the response from somebody that you are asking for or seeking, the ownership is on you to alter how you communicate. And that's a big takeaway. A lot of people just repeat the same thing over and over and expect a different result. And I remember being in Italy, I wrote about this in the book, where an American was ordering an ice cream from an Italian, this restaurant. The American didn't speak Italian, the Italian didn't speak English. And the American just kept saying the same thing over and over, louder and louder and louder each time. So the American was just increasing the volume. The Italian obviously heard it before, didn't understand if it was louder. So if that person in that scenario, the American would have like thought, well, maybe I should try a different approach. they may have got a different response. And I think a lot of us go through life trying the same thing over and over with our spouse, with people at work, expecting a different result from a communication perspective. And we get frustrated.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's step 4. And then step 5 is monotasking. Monotasking is like the opposite of multitasking. Monotasking helps with 2 main things. One, it makes you more productive and less stress, because if you put blocks of time on your calendar where you only do one thing versus constantly jump back and forth between email, text messages, and everything else, if you just do one thing, you'll be more productive. All that context switching causes you to be stressed and be less productive. Monotasking also helps with being present. So we talked about communication. If I am only focused on the person I'm having a conversation with or communicating with, I'm going to listen better, I'm going to respond better, and the person is going to feel like I appreciate and understand them. So monotasking is extremely important. And then the 6th step is empathy. I talk about cognitive versus effective empathy. Cognitive empathy is really perspective taking. I think it's important to have empathy for somebody else's shoes, like you put yourself in their shoes and see where they're coming from. And then the final step is Kaizen. Kaizen is basically constant and never ending improvement, or CANI, as some people say. So with anything you do, mastery is a journey. It's not like you're going to flip a light switch and become an expert at all these things. Like any of those steps, like communication, I'm going to have to constantly work at it and realize I may need to unlearn some things and actually get worse before I get better. As adults, a lot of what we have to do is like unlearn things we learned before that actually got us so far, but won't get us to the next level in life.
Okay. Now that's let's kind of dissect a little bit here.
All right. I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time.
No, that's fantastic. Excellent. Now you wrote this book, later on, well after you transitioned from the military. Well, kind of looking back, did you utilize, or not utilize, some of those? What was important to you at the time from a communications perspective and emotional intelligence perspective that you reflecting back, that were important to you, or that you wish you knew back then, perhaps?
Yeah, really all of those steps. I think I've always been into personal development, Tony Robbins or Landmark or Jim Rohn or a lot of these different things. I haven't just gone into one of them. In the military, communication is an example. I was like that guy at the Italian restaurant. Maybe not that extreme, but I didn't take ownership on my communication as much as I should have. I would say something and expect my bosses to understand it, where if I didn't get the result I was asking for, then they didn't really understand what I was communicating. And we hear this all the time in my industry. People always say, well, the board of directors didn't give me the budget, or I didn't get the budget I was asking for. And often that's because it wasn't communicated in a way that resonated with whoever is receiving that information. And it's the same thing in the military. It's pretty much in any facet of life, that aspect of communication. And something else that I discovered on my journey is I used to have very little empathy. I used to think, well, I figured it out. I came from this very, poverty, drug addicted mother background and very chaotic. If I could figure it out, so could everybody else. And I had this chip on my shoulder. And I think I had that in the military and I had that for a lot of my career. And what that did, though, it made me think, I don't need help from anybody. I've got it all figured out. And I had that mindset in the military quite a bit. And that really kept me to glass ceiling. You can't see the ceiling because they call it glass ceiling because you can't see it. But when I realized that I don't have it figured out, and this is what I want to do, and I put that out there and ask for some help, then people will show up and help you get to like the next level or figure that thing out that you've been struggling with. And that has really enhanced my relationships with people and made me more fulfilled, because I think me thinking I'm smarter than everybody and I can lone wolf it, as they say, just figure it all out myself. It's like me against the world, which used to be on my mindset. I'm part of the world. It's not me against the world, right? So when I realized that, and I think having my business really made me realize that as an entrepreneur, there are so many aspects to a business. There's marketing, sales, accounting, cash flow, client retention. There's all these different things that you can't possibly master. And I used to think I had them all figured out, but when my business was suffering, I realized I need to get some help here. I don't have it figured out. And the only way to get some help is to admit you don't have the answers. Then that requires some vulnerability and putting your ego aside.
Okay, fantastic. So you kind of, learn that and then improve upon it as you went forward and you're in different aspects of your career.
Yes. So like now I am part of different networking groups and I participate, and I will say I don't know something. When I first joined some groups, when I started my business, I would just kind of sit in silence on the periphery of the group, pretending I knew things when I really didn't, because I was embarrassed to say, I don't really understand, a balance sheet for my business. I thought I should already know this. And there's some things I didn't know, but I was afraid to admit that for fear, it's that fear thing holding you back, for fear of feeling stupid, basically. But if you always hold on to that, it's hard to get the help, and it's hard to learn the new things you need to learn. And one of the things in my journey that helped probably the most is I attended this event called the Landmark Forum. It's a personal development event. And one of the things they ultimately teach you is there is no inherent meaning to life. So whatever experiences you have in life, the meaning you attach to them can either hinder you or serve you. So with me, I used to have a lot of resentment with my childhood because of my mother doing drugs and being not an absent mother, and just felt chaos and the poverty and all that. But and that was holding me back. And then I could sort of changed the meaning, because I probably would have even gone to the Air Force Academy if I didn't have that drive to get out of my chaotic environment. So my chaotic environment actually gave me the drive to get out of it, which made me who I am today as well. So again, I could have held on to that resentment or shifted the meaning.
Okay. So building emotional intelligence and communication helps you to kind of reconcile the past as well as help you going forward, sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, fantastic.
And that also goes back to taking ownership. I'm a big fan of taking ownership for your life. And I think a lot of us forget this, but my belief is the outer world, what's around you, is a reflection of the inner world. So if you don't have things resolved within yourself, these problems or challenges are going to keep showing up in the outer world for you in life until you resolve the things internally.
Okay. Now with no matter where someone is in the process, whether they're still going to be in the military for a while or transitioning out, or perhaps just recently exited the military, what are some first steps that they can take as they transition or prepare to do so from an emotional intelligence perspective, from a communications perspective, that they can really utilize from this book and from your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, a first step would be to read my book. I do have some activities in the book that help as well. I think from a first step, a lot of it stems with awareness. With any personal development, we have to have awareness as the first step, and that's the first step of my book. An awareness that how you show up in the world and how I'm a fan of assessment exams. So like somebody could take a test on like 16personalities.com, tell you like what type of personality you have. And it's something that's good to reflect on. I don't think they're always accurate, but we often think people in the world see us a certain way and we see the world a certain way. So from an awareness perspective, I think it's important to take some of these assessment exams. The Enneagram is another one, where it'll give you some insight into how you view the world and how other people view you. And then how, when you're stressed, you change a little bit and how other people see that as well. When you get out of the military, you may think, well, everyone thinks of me as a military person or this specific way, where that may not even be the case. But the challenge is, if you think everyone's viewing you as a certain way, you're going to show up that way, and then it becomes a reality. So it's like, it's like this weird mind game. You have to detach yourself a little bit from these preconceived notions you think other people may have about you, and that's where these assessment exams can give you some insight into that. It's more of a reflection activity, and I think that's extremely important. And I still today I have challenges with that quite often. It's mastery's a journey, and I haven't mastered these topics yet either.
Sure. And they can take these tests. Now, I would imagine, since we're always progressing and improving, that these are just, a snapshot in time. Do you advocate, retaking these assessments from time to time as well?
I do. Like the DISC assessment, I've retaken that one, and my numbers have changed a little bit on that one since like 6 years ago, and I took it recently. So there's been a shift. And they will also give you some insight into, like, if you're transitioning from the military, and let's say you take the DISC assessment and you're a high D, which means dominant decision making, a low I, which means basically social, then you may not succeed in a job where you have to be extremely social and can't make decisions. So they give you some insight into that as well. And I think a lot of us struggle in jobs, in our role as a spouse or a partner, in our family, because we don't understand our inherent behaviors. And one of the things in the DISC assessment is like compliance and systems, for instance. If I'm somebody that needs a system to operate in, like the military, we talked about this a little bit, like a standard operating procedure, but then I go to a job that is completely unstructured, I'm setting myself up for failure, or I'm going to be frustrated a lot. So understanding that about yourself is extremely important. And a lot of people, when they take that exam, they may have a high D and a high C, which basically means they want to make a decision, but they can't. They want to make a decision, but they can't. So it's like one foot on the gas, one at the brake at the same time. So if they know that, then maybe they should work on that internally before putting themselves in specific roles in a job.
Okay.
And
Now,
for me, like you said, for me, some of these things have shifted over time. Like my I has gone up. I've become more social and less introverted, because I realized to have more fulfillment and achieve more, I need to elicit this, get the support of other people as well, and also add value to them.
sure, absolutely. Now, how can, with these assessments and understanding yourself, how can that also benefit those transitioning in terms of their other aspects of wellness besides job, their relationships with family or friends, or their, taking care of your body in terms of health, eating, exercise, joy, other aspects? How can they utilize these skills in other aspects of their lives?
One of the benefits of taking these assessments is it gives you sort of a recipe of dealing with other people. A lot of our wellness, our stress comes from our interactions with other people typically. And I think, how you feel on a daily and hourly and minute basis really affects your quality of life. And that a lot of that is your own thoughts, but a lot of it is how you interact with other people. So those assessments give you that recipe. So if you have like your spouse take the assessment exam and for instance, like the DISC, and they have a specific ratings in each category, and you have specific ratings, it tells you how to alter your communication with that person to fit their model of the world to improve your relationship. And if your relationship is better, then your wellness is going to be better as well. That's just one example. So it's not just about your career and your own strengths. It's about how you communicate with other people as well and how you interact with them.
Okay. Now, how has that, in terms of wellness and quality of life, how have these principles helped you in other aspects of your life in addition to your career?
They've given me insight to what I find frustrating and why I find it frustrating with positions. Like one of the assessments I've taken is the predictive index assessment. According to that assessment, I come out as a maverick, which is pretty accurate, which means I don't like the status quo. I don't like to be overly supervised. I don't like to be put in the corner. I like constant growth and challenge. I like things to be different. I don't like systems that much. I'll push against a system that doesn't work. So after I took that exam, I realized, or that assessment, that most of the challenges I had, even in the military, were because my personality type didn't fit the roles I was in. And that's why when I became a CEO and entrepreneur, I was more stressed, but I was also happier in some weird way because my personality was aligned with what I was doing. And now I sold my company in December of last year. So I worked for the parent company. Some of the frustrations that keep showing up for me are because I am working for other people. I can't control the system. I can't change the system myself. And it's because of my personality type. But now that I understand it, I can learn to work with it better. So it's really some awareness and some tools as well.
Okay, fantastic. I love how you've really utilized the principles in a lot of different areas over the course of your career and in other aspects of your life. And you're definitely perhaps the smartest person in the room.
I don't know about that.
Well, Christian, how can people get in contact with you?
They can go to my website. It's christianespinoza.com. That's probably the easiest way, or they can connect with me on social media like LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram.
Okay. And can they get the book from your website, or how would they get the book?
To get the book, the easiest way is probably on Amazon. It is on other platforms. On Amazon, the electronic version of the book, the Kindle version, the paperback, the hardcover, as well as the Audible version are all through Amazon.
Sure. Okay, fantastic. Well, we will include all of those in the show notes. Christian, it's been amazing. I love how you have really sought to understand those skills with communication and emotional intelligence and really utilized it and helped others to utilize it. I hope those transitioning can really grasp onto a lot of these concepts and become better because of it. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Michelle. I appreciate it.